Hello, everyone, and welcome to this presentation by Dr. Jeremy Coleman. And I'll go ahead and introduce him and let him take over the presentation after that point. So Dr. Coleman is the principal at Brookview Elementary School in Indianapolis and Warren Township Schools. He's taught and led public schools for nearly 20 years. He started his career as a youth mentor and has served as a correctional officer, coach, teacher, and administrator. Dr. Coleman has consulted for private and public schools on a range of topics, including school climate and classroom culture, parent and community engagement, and school leadership. Okay. And Dr. Coleman's presentation is on, let me get the title in front of me. I had to scan over. I'll let you do your presentation or title, Dr. Coleman. So Dr. Jeremy Coleman, I'll turn the presentation over to you and I'll mute myself.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stuvey. It is really an honor to be here this morning, and wherever you are, however you are listening, I do want to thank you for taking the time to be a part of this session. First of all, just a message about Keep Indiana Learning. This is a platform that provides educators with empowering and collaborative network opportunities that will transform teaching and learning. That is our hope. I'm certainly happy to take part in this. I want to personally thank two people here, Dr. Christy Hilton, who I've been in contact with since the beginning, and Lena Darnay for the support and the planning, all that goes along with this conference. So that being said, happy to be here. Let's get started. Also, live transcripts will be available for this session if you so choose that format. Question. This is for teachers, leaders, anybody that is involved in the educational hiring process. Suppose you have two finalists for a teaching position at your school. Most things being equal, one candidate is more focused on task completion. The other one is more focused on people. Who do you hire? The question is posed to the audience, and there's no wrong answer here, but this does give you a peek into your own preferences, your own biases, if you will, onto which type of people you want to be your teammates. And so this is something that I often think about. These are not two sides of the same coin. They are not a trick question. Both of these things are important. Task completion and making sure you focus on people is very, very important. But the last question, who do you hire? This is going to be one of the keystones of this presentation this morning. This is what we're talking about today. Who's on your team? Building an A+ team, because as we all know, teams are so important. They're critical to what we do at schools and in jobs across the country. First, we'll ask the question, why build a team? Next, we'll talk about how to choose your team. Finally, we'll end with talking about how to grow and sustain your team for future success. Why build a team? Well, simply put, humans are wired to connect and to be social. There's not much you can do without a team. More has been accomplished together than alone. And more importantly, schools, it is a function of how we operate in schools, from grade level teams, to planning teams, to parent teams, to leadership teams, to parent group teams. I mean, there are teams just all over the place. So as has been said in the past, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And teams will help you do that. So as you can see in the funny video there, if they don't cooperate, they're lunch. They're somebody else's lunch. So there are clear benefits to making sure that you cooperate. First question for you is this. As a teacher, as a leader, first consider these two. Who do you lead? And why do you lead? This is a question that I come back to almost daily as I think about planning, as I think about preparing the agenda for development sessions. Who do I lead? And in my role as principal at Brookview elementary school, I lead teachers, parents, and students. And I have to be cognizant of my audience. Knowing who I lead is very, very important. But also, why do I lead? This is critical as well, because you have to have the right why to sustain yourself. As many of you know, working in schools is already difficult, it's challenging. With our current state of affairs now with COVID and all the things we have to do to adapt to COVID just increases our challenge, increases our complexity. So your why must be strong enough to sustain you through difficult times. For me, the who I lead a group of talented teachers, a group of committed parents, and a group of amazing students at my school. And so that being said, they are a diverse group of students. They bring exceptional experiences with them. They bring knowledge with them. And they are some of the most optimistic human beings I've ever seen, especially the 5-year-olds in kindergarten. Love that. That's kind of the who. The why I lead, well, you know, Dr. Cornel West says, you can't lead the people unless you love the people. And so for me, it's been a labor of love since the beginning. As Dr. Stuvey said, I worked as a correctional officer and a mentor. So I've really been engaged with students on the individual level, students who are challenging, students who are oftentimes forgotten. These are the kind of students that I've always been drawn to, because my why is, why will we leave anybody behind? Why? It hurts us all. So that's the who and the why. And I want you to take a moment and just think about who you lead and think about why you lead. You see the bus. And if any of you have read Jim Collins' Good to Great, one of the best-selling business books of all time, you know that Jim Collins says, first who. That means you have to think about who you put on the bus, who you hire, who you bring onto your team. And this is one of the signature pieces of the book, Good to Great. If you don't take away anything from the book, take away this. Who you hire is critically important to your mission success.
Okay, come on, everyone. Time schedule. You know what's got to be done. Move it, move it, move it. Hey, you there, pick up the pace. You're falling behind.
Speaking of who, if you're in trouble, if you're in danger, you want somebody who's going to link arms with you, form an ant ball, and redirect any kind of threat. You want somebody who's going to get elbow to elbow with you when times get tough. So who you hire is vitally important. I want to skip ahead one slide. I'll come back to the previous slide. As many of you know now, Amazon is probably the most profitable company in the world. And I want to clue you into one thing that Bezos talks about when he talks about hiring. Setting the bar high is how they approach hiring. And it's one of the single most important elements of their success. This is the rule that Bezos talks about internally. First of all, the next person you hire has to be better than the last person you hired. So if you are a managing person on the team, a director, a leader, your goal is to continue to up the talent level and up the capacity of each hire. So eventually you're only bringing on people who improve the team. Another interesting tidbit about what happens at Amazon, Bezos also has another rule. It's called the 2 pizza rule. And he says you should never have a meeting with with too many people. In other words, you should be able to feed everybody in the meeting with 2 pizzas. If you got more than that, you got too many people in the room. Less than that, you're able to be nimble and move quickly. So hiring becomes very, very, very important. And just taking a page out of Amazon's book, making sure that the last person you hire ups the ante, if you will, and increases your team capacity. So I'm going back a slide here. This is from Sarah Tavel. She talks about 7s. Now, I'll set this up for you. If you think about a rating of each of your teammates or staff members, and you rate them on a scale of 1 to 10 in any competency, overall or individually. What she talks about is, think about the people who you would rate as a 7. And she says that 7s kill companies. And when I first read that, I had to pause for a minute. I thought, but wait, 7s, that's about a C+. Surely 7s help a company. But in her view, she's talking about 7s are bad, and this is why. When someone is a 4 or a 5, perhaps, it's obvious. You know it, they stand out. Chances are they know it. It's easy to identify a 4, 5, or 6 and put them on some type of improvement plan to where they can either counsel themselves out of that position, or you guys can find a way to mutually part ways. Those are obvious. Also 10s, 9s. These are your obvious high performers, fantastic employees, turn things in on time, love kids, love parents, love everything's great. But she says the 7s are culture killers, because if you have a 7, it's the lost opportunity that you're missing out on. And what she says is, if a 7 has a C, you're missing out on a potential 10, because a 7 typically will remain a 7. And a 7 typically is going to be the kind of person that kind of flies under the radar. And if you're a principal or a superintendent or a district leader, we've all fallen victim to this, myself included. If you have a chance to evaluate and to assist, we tend to run to the places that need more help first. And we tend to run to people who need more help. But if you're a 7, you tend to be able to hide under the radar a bit, and you don't get the necessary help you need, or for whatever reason. So I thought that was very interesting. And I wanted to challenge you to think about 7s. So finally here, she talks about the opportunity cost, which I've talked about, but also that she says the execution of the team is often brought down by its weakest link. And I know this is strong language, so I do apologize. I'll say not weakest link. What I'll say is a person who has not yet realized their potential. Either way, they're limiting the performance of the team. And we'll talk more about teams later, but just think about 7s. Okay, so that was kind of a bit about why a team. You go further if you go together. We know that humans are wired to connect. We know that teams are an essential structure of schools. So it's very important to understand we are on a team. That is what we have to do. Let's find a way to choose better and grow better. You all know the traditional instruments when it comes to hiring. So some schools do phone screens. You may have a candidate do a written response. Then the one-on-one interview, you have structured questions, semi-structured. Some candidates bring a portfolio, sample lesson plans, group interview, and things like that. These are all usual suspects in terms of what to do in a job interview. So I think there is maybe one thing here that's not on the list, and I think about performance tasks. If you've ever been in a situation where you wanted to hire someone, but you couldn't decide, maybe you send them a performance task and you ask them to do something that's very unique or very situational that corresponds to the job. Question for you. What is missing from this list here? As you watch the video, wherever you are or whenever you are, think about what's not on the list here. If you don't use one of these, maybe write that down as a note to yourself, as something to add to your interview process. Now, would it be wrong to do all these? Well, I think each situation is unique, depending on the position that's being advertised. I think you can obviously always begin with some sort of phone screen. I know most of us in education look at resumes and licensing first, so that tends to separate people there. Sample plans are important. I think people think about interviews differently as well. Do you start with a group interview? Do you start with a one-on-one? How do you get more people involved? How do you get your team involved? If you're hiring for a 4th grade teacher, do you want your 4th grade team in? In what ways does that help? In what ways does that blind you? Maybe you hire a 4th grade teacher, but you bring in kindergarten teachers to help you. Think about that. In what ways does that add value to the process? So these are all tools that we can use to help initially begin the process of picking out applicants. I want to also talk to you about the scorecard. To me, the scorecard is important for any school, for any organization. When you think about hiring, you should begin with your internal mission, vision, goals, etc. You should know exactly what you are as a school, exactly who you are as a school. I'm going back to one of the earlier slides now. Who you lead and why you lead. Those messages should be deeply embedded in your scorecard. You should look at three key things. Mission. What is your mission? When you hire people, they should be people that support and enhance your mission. 2, outcomes. What kind of school are you? What are you looking to do when your kids come to your building? What do you expect your kids to be able to have, know, believe, and show when they leave your building? That is a part of your outcomes, and your outcomes should be embedded in your interview process. You want to find out the candidate's ability to support your outcomes and your mission. Finally, 3, competencies. What behavioral elements make the candidate a good fit? If your school is really laser focused on PLCs, you might want to make sure that this candidate has experience with PLCs, or at the very least has the same philosophy around PLCs and collaborative planning, collaborative problem solving, things like that. So my advice would be, as a team, as a school, create some sort of a scorecard so you know what your values are, what your mission is. You begin to identify who you are as a school. Now, when it's time to hire somebody, you can hire somebody that's a direct mission fit, a direct outcomes fit, a direct competency fit. When you get your scorecard ready and you have screened applicants and you have found the people that you actually want to interview, now it's time for the interview. This could be group, this could be one-on-one. Let's talk through a few of these things. Everyone has been given interview questions at some point in their career. Most of us are pretty good at answering, and that's a good thing. It's also a challenge to you as a leader, as a teacher, as a school staff member, on how to make sure you're using the instrument to get the most bang for your buck. Questions in the interview typically correspond to 3 categories. They're situational, they're behavioral, and they're competency-based questions. You've heard these a million times. So things like, tell me about a time when, if you have this scenario, what would you do? Those are classic examples of situational and behavioral questions. Then as a school, you want to ask competency-based questions. If you have a very strong and a very specific reading program, you want to ask teachers about their experience with that. Maybe you have a very unique and specific writing program or a math program. You want to ask questions that get at the competencies that you need from a teacher in your building. These are 3 general categories. I'm sure there are some questions that fall outside of that, but that's typically what you'll do as you prepare questions. Also think about the number of questions, the length of the interview. At what point can you ask too many questions? Is an hour-and-a-half interview too long? Is it too short? What will you gain from the information? I also want to give you guys just a heads up on some of the types of people who are in these interviews, and I'm talking about leaders. This is about you. You can be what people call the art critic, and I'm going to tell you right now, you don't want to be this person. Managers or leaders who hire the same way they decide on their art preferences. Oh, it's a gut feeling. It's an intuition. Be very, very careful of intuition hiring. In fact, Harvard Business Online says that this is called voodoo hiring. You're not basing this on any objective measures. There's no scorecard. There's no rating system. It's just based on how you feel. And we'll talk about this later, but our biases creep in there more often than you know. So you definitely want to avoid the art critic. Also, there's the sponge. These are the leaders who ask multiple teammates to conduct multiple interviews to vet a teacher, but everyone asks more or less the same questions, and it comes down to, do we like this person? And I know that's a human nature thing. We want to hire people who are like us and who we like, but that is not objective. And I want to steer you away from some of these things about how you feel and do we like them. Then there's the prosecutor. Don't be this person. This person is going to ask 100 difficult questions and never let the candidate get any rhythm. Now, I've been there. I've been the prosecutor. I want to tell you, don't do this. the reason I got sucked into it, I was trying to ask tough, probing questions. I wanted to kick the tires, as it were. But what I found out was I put the interviewee kind of in a difficult spot. They were not ready to get these rapid fire questions. They felt like I, as the principal, didn't really want them to be there. And I could tell their interview, their confidence and their self-esteem began to falter a little bit based on my questions and my approach. The reason you want to avoid this is simple. You want to find out all that your candidate knows. And the best way to do that is to create other structures to get at real, more objective answers, not the prosecutor. And then finally, the chatterbox. I've been this person too. I'm telling you, don't be like me. This is when you spend your entire interview, and most of it, on small talk. And it happens. There are some people you sit in front of a panel and they are just lovely people. I mean, they are lovely. Sometimes you'll ask them a question that's competency-based and they'll go into a long story and the story makes sense, the story connects, but they've spent a good deal of your interview telling personal anecdotes that don't really help you in figuring out who the best candidate is. So you definitely want to avoid that kind of situation. These are just a few things to think about when you're in the interview. Now, let's talk about bias. This is really one of the key features of our time this morning. And if you take away two things from this session, this is thing number one, bias. I'm going to begin by saying this. The two of the most respected people, Daniel Kahneman, who won a Nobel Prize, and Amos Tversky, they have been doing research on cognitive bias for decades. And I listened to a podcast with those two gentlemen. And when it was all over, they talked for about an hour and a half. They said, listen, we've studied this for 3 decades and we're still not very good at avoiding it ourselves. So this is not something to perfect. This is a journey. This is something to be aware of to make better decisions. Again, you will not become a master of this overnight, but you definitely want to think about it. So again, wherever you are, whenever you are, get down a piece of paper or some type of writing object, be it an iPad, be it a phone, kind of app, and write down this number, 60%. After you write down 60%, I want you to think about what this means. 60% of people who interview have already decided on the candidate within the first 15 minutes of the interview. More than half. They've already made a decision in just 15 minutes. Typically, interviews are a lot longer than 15 minutes. So we'll talk about what happens for the remaining time. I want you to add another number. Write this down, 20%. Write down 20%. So 20% of people have already made their decision within the first 5 minutes of the interview. So you add those two up, 20 plus 60 gets you to 80%. That is almost everyone on your panel. People, when you sit down and you're a part of an interview, you have to be careful and guard yourself against this tendency. This is human nature. We make snap decisions. We use our intuition. And in the first 5 minutes, we've already made a decision. So the reason we do this is partly called the halo effect. And these are cognitive biases. There are many, and I won't cover them all or even half of them. I'll just cover a few that are pertinent to our conversation this morning. But the halo effect is when you have 1 or 2 positive experiences with the candidate, and it tends to color your impression of them for the rest of your time together. This happens in many ways. This could be from the resume. This could be from the initial phone screen. This could be from doing an internet search on this candidate. You see one thing you like, and typically it's something that reminds you of yourself. I'm just being honest. These are biases. We tend to like people who are like ourselves. So if you're on their Facebook page and they hunt and you hunt, that's a direct connection. If you're on their Instagram and you find out they're into music and you're into music, again, this is the halo effect. So despite their answers, you've already anchored yourself with a positive moment, and you use that to kind of filter the rest of their interview. We can talk about why that's dangerous. And the most obvious reason is you're not being objective. Now, the opposite is also true. This is called the horn effect. When you have one negative experience with the candidate, and that tends to color less favorably, I might add, the rest of the interview. So this happens in many ways as well. This could be on the resume. Let's just start there. Somebody has a misspelled word. You've seen it, you've been there. And for some reason in your mind, you're already thinking, oh, this is bad. And now you're looking for other words that are also misspelled. You're almost looking for other ways to see how this candidate falls short. Now, there's another bias that corresponds to that. It's called confirmation bias. And confirmation bias is when we look for evidence that confirms our viewpoint. So if you have a candidate that initially says something funny, something you like, agrees with you, or has a connective point, now you're confirming your belief that they're awesome for the entire interview. You're thinking, wow, I like this person. They're smart. So if they say something that's a questionable answer, you'll find ways to, filter it in a positive way. And the opposite is also true with the horn effect. So be very aware of cognitive bias, especially confirmation bias, the horn effect, and the halo effect. Well, how do you get away from this? Simple. Simple in theory, harder in practice. The first thing that you want to do is ask better questions. You want your questions to be more objective in nature. You want your follow-up questions to really get to the heart of the original question. You also want to make sure you introduce more objective measures into your process. Here's a big takeaway. I want you to start thinking about scoring. So if you have a question, let's say you have 10 questions in your interview, you print those questions up, you talk about it amongst your team, you create some kind of rubric that says this is the evidence of a perfect response. It's a 4, we'll call it a 4. This is evidence of a proficient response, we'll call it a 3. And we'll skip down. This is a 1. This is an example of a response that is beneath our standard. And now you have a 4, 3, 2, 1 rubric for each question. So at this point, when you go through the interview and you write down your notes and you talk about it afterwards and debrief, you now have an objective, as much as possible, objective rubric for how each candidate answered the question. No more about, well, I like what they said, and this made me laugh, and the person is cool because, no, how does it fit to your scorecard? How does each candidate's answer fit to your mission? How does their answer fit to your competencies? How does the answer fit to your school culture? So that's what I would say about bias. Make sure you have more objective measures introduced into your process. I'm going to pause for a second. I want you to write some of these things down and make sure you have a 1-pager with some takeaways. So first things first, 80% of interviewers make a decision within the first 15 minutes. Write that down. Dr. Stuvey's on it. He's got it written down. Next, write down confirmation bias. When you think about confirmation bias, he's got it, confirmation bias. What do we do as the interview panel that is subjective? And how do we kind of skew the results? Third thing, how do you avoid it? Introduce objective measures like a rubric into your answer criteria. Okay, so we got that. If you're watching on video later, you can always rewind it and go back to it. So bias, very, very important to be mindful of, because again, Dr. Kahneman, Tversky, they're experts, been doing this for 3 decades, and they say they still make bias mistakes daily. So it isn't about perfection, it's about progress. It's about awareness, knowing what you're doing when you're creating the interview materials. Yeah, I love that video for a number of reasons. The first one is we can all relate. If you have an external threat that is challenging your school culture, your teams, when your team comes together, you are operating at maximum capacity, and it feels good to circle the wagons, as they say. You guys can defeat any external threat when you come together. So these videos have all been of a similar nature. How does a team, a collection of individuals, come together to mitigate risk? And I just love these examples. Okay, let's keep moving. We start off with why a team. Well, we know that schools are inherently structured in a way that puts people in groups. So that's important. We then talked about how to choose your team, bias, making sure we're aware of our cognitive biases and how to work around that. So now we talk about how to grow your team. And I want to just start by saying this. We as people, most of us, we all want to be loved. We all have a need to be accepted, flaws and all. We all want to make sure that we are appreciated, that we are valued, but even more than that, you talk about the author, Brene Brown, and about being vulnerable. We all are scared. We all are anxious. We all have these same fundamental human emotions. So we need to find a way to grow together and be together to accomplish our task. But we got to start by recognizing that. If you're a school leader, understand that sometimes your teachers might not come to you because there's a lack of trust. And don't take it personal. Trust is earned over time. But also, even when you have trust, there's still anxiety within people, and that may prevent them from approaching you. If you're a teacher and you have a teammate that doesn't always divulge information to you, don't take it personal. Assume the best. They may be dealing with some anxiety that has nothing to do with you. And the third thing I'll say before we dive into our growth portion is, this is a much bigger topic that we can't cover in 28 minutes, communication. We hear it a lot. We hear it in life. We hear it in marriage. We hear it in family. Everyone's talking about how to be a more effective communicator. And it's vital that we're able to do that. But I want to tell you something else. It's equally as important, possibly more, that we become listeners. Everyone's talking about communicating and talking and crafting a message. We got to talk more about listening. The more you can listen, the more you can learn from people. Okay, so at my school, I love doing this activity. And you can find this, I have a resource page at the very end of this presentation, but it's called the Compass Points activity. And the way it works is you find you a large room, outdoor space or whatever, and you post these cardinal points around the room, north, south, east, and west. And each point corresponds to a particular personality characteristic. So if you're north, you're about action. Let's do it. Let's jump in. Let's try things. You're considered a north. If you're east, you're a speculator. You like to plan big picture. You want to know what's going to happen first and then do with details later. So you look at the big picture before you jump in, kind of cautious. If you're on the south side of this activity, you want to know about feelings. How does Amy feel about the project? I want to talk to Jessica, but I want to know how she feels first. Oh my God, this thing happened. I want to check in with Jason to make sure he's okay. You are a feeler. You take into consideration how people feel about things and you make sure voices are heard. Going to our last cardinal point here, West Side people, you pay attention to detail. Organized, logical, sequential, most likely. You want to know who, what, when, where, and why. So these are the descriptors for each cardinal point. And so what I've done in the past is I would take these points, lay them out, and do two things. Whole staff, I want to know where my people are on these points. But the way I do it is different. I take each grade level team and each group, and I have them step forward and say, okay, this is first grade. I want you guys to find your point. And then once they step out, we pause. Okay, look around the room. First grade team. Look at where you are. Look at who you are. Understand what your colleagues' natural disposition is. And it's very eye-opening because if you have a team of 4 teachers and all 4 people are on the same point, that's both a blessing and a curse. So if you guys are all West Side people, that means you all love details and you pay attention to small things. But where are my feelers at? Oh my God. Where are my people who make sure their voices are heard? So you have the potential to kind of butt heads a little bit. You have the potential to be laser focused on details and miss the big picture. The same is true if all 4 of you guys are on the East Side. Everyone likes to think about the big picture. So you guys are great to start the project, but who are my finishers? Who are my people to get it across the finish line? And so I've seen this play out in many ways. Sometimes you have teams who are very one direction heavy. Sometimes you have people who are distributed. And if you have someone on your team that's at every point, then my challenge to you would say is, listen, team, you guys have a diverse set of skills. You got to make sure that you use those skills to move the team forward. You guys are all different, and you have to find the beauty in the difference. You also can do this whole team, have everyone step out, have everyone find a point, and then talk about the ways in which your dispositions are helpful to a team, but you got to come back to this. Talk about the ways in which your dispositions could possibly hold the team back. Because like I said earlier, it's often a blessing and a curse. You think about your skills. In some contexts, it moves the team forward. In other contexts, it holds the team back. So skills are highly contextual. So this is a great activity to do. Again, on the final slide, you'll see a link. I think it's the School Reform Initiative. They have tons of awesome team building activities on there. If you have a chance, please check that out. So again, this is about growing your team. And the most important thing about growing your team is knowing your team. The more you know about your team, the better you guys can move forward. This is one of those quotes that has been around for a while in the business world, so I'll go ahead and read it for you. One of the frequent arguments against investing in PD, in people, in professional development is what happens if I train my teachers and I train my staff and they leave? And we've thought about this a lot. You know, I put countless hours, countless meetings, put all this time and they leave for a different district or for a different job altogether. And that's one way to see it. But I would challenge you to see it the other way. A better question is, what happens if you don't train people and they stay? So now you have people who are not adequately equipped to handle whatever challenges confront you in a school. And as we know right now, there are many challenges out there, from COVID, from family, from community, from internal classroom dynamics, kids coming to school not prepared to learn, kids coming to school just focus on basic needs. And those things are very, very important because they drive a student's mentality. And if a kid isn't ready to learn, you know how hard it is as a teacher, as a leader, to get those kids in the right headspace. So the question shouldn't be, what if I train people and they leave? The question should be, what if I don't train them and they stay? That would be a bigger challenge, I would say. Okay. Earlier, I mentioned I want you guys to have 2 main takeaways. The first one was definitely already written down. You have it in your notes. This is number 2. This is about the 5 dysfunctions of a team. So again, find something to write with, paper, pencil, an app, device, whatever you have. And I want you to draw a pyramid similar to the one you see on the screen. And I want you to think about something. This is from Patrick Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team. And I like the way Patrick lays this out. What we'll do is we'll start at the very, very top. At the top, I want you to write the word results. Do that now. And again, you'll have 5 different rows. Your top row is going to be labeled results. Your next row is going to be labeled accountability. And then you'll move down and you'll follow this same pyramid. And I want you to take 30 seconds and get those things written in. And then we'll talk about how this works. Results, accountability, commitment, fear of conflict, and trust. And you can just write the words results, accountability, commitment, conflict, and trust. So if you are a school leader or a team leader, or even a staff member, whatever capacity you're in, let's look at how this plays out from the very, very top. When you think about people who are inattentive to results, it's about being selfish, okay? If you put your personal goals ahead of the goals of the team, that's how this cascade of dysfunction begins. So staff stop sharing, people stop passing the ball, as it were, and they focus more on personal, individual acclaim. They want to do what they want to do. You have teachers who like to teach a certain way, and they don't listen to what the district is saying because they want to do it their way. That's how it starts. That's the selfishness part. That's how it begins. The reason, as we move down to accountability, the reason why that staff member did what they wanted to do was because the school's best interest wasn't in mind, because no peer-to-peer accountability. When teachers don't hold other teachers accountable, when staff don't hold other staff accountable, then you have people who can act in a more self-interested way. And you're probably thinking, but wait, it isn't the teacher's job to do that. But wait, it's the principal's job. And I would say, yes, the principal has a major role in that. But what I've learned and what I've seen is peer-to-peer accountability is far more effective in holding up high standards in a group than anything that I can do as a principal. What can I do really? Yeah, I can threaten with a write-up. I can threaten with punishment, but that is not going to change behavior. It may momentarily modify what you do or don't do, but it won't change your mindset. So therefore, peer-to-peer accountability is far more important. And again, you're asking, why are teachers doing what they want to do in a self-interested way? Because their grade level partners are not stepping in and saying, wait, that's not the plan. That isn't the mission. That's not why we're here. Top down is not enough. It must operate and live within the team level. Okay, so move down again to commitment. Why aren't people committed? Why aren't people speaking up? Why aren't people holding each other accountable? Well, there's a lack of commitment. Again, in Patrick Lencioni's pyramid here, he talks about that people were not committed enough because they didn't have any buy-in to the plan. So they're not committed, they won't defend the plan. Let's say you're a principal, you have a new, shiny initiative. Okay, guys, here's what's happening. And then you push it down in a top-down manner. You'll have some teachers who'll do it, no questions asked. You'll have other teachers who need buy-in and they won't do it. You're thinking about, well, why don't my leaders encourage or influence the ones who are not going to do it? They don't buy into the plan. You know why? They weren't a part of the planning process. They didn't build it. You know, it's been said that people have a hard time tearing a fence down that they help build. And the same is true in our field. If you help build a fence, you'll have a harder time tearing that fence down. In fact, you'll pull the paint out, and when that fence gets nicked or destroyed, you'll put in new panels, you'll add more paint, you'll make sure it stays beautiful because you helped build it. And the same is true for our school culture. When you have a team that operates at a high level, when they are committed, when they are invested, they uphold that for you. Okay, so now move down again from commitment to conflict. And this is one of my favorite ones to talk about because especially in schools, you have people who are, you've heard the word before, non-confrontational. I hear it all the time. People just don't want any drama. They don't want to confront people. They don't want to deal with the feelings of, they're not going to like me if I say this. They won't be my friend anymore if I say that. So why not speak up? Why not get involved? They fear interpersonal conflict. And when you fear interpersonal conflict, there's one main reason you have that. And now we're moving down to the final part of the pyramid. Again, Patrick Lencioni says at the very bottom of all this, the root of all this is absence of trust. And I want to tell you how this plays out. You don't trust people. You don't talk open and honestly to them. You don't trust people. You don't challenge them. Didn't trust that people would speak up. You didn't trust that if you speak up, they wouldn't respond in a very defensive or aggressive manner. The reason you can tell your best friend that their idea is stupid is because you know that they believe in you. They know you have their best interests. So they can listen to a harsh critique because they know you're out for their betterment, not for their destruction. So this is really foundational to what I want you to look at in terms of leaders and teachers. If you're a leader, you have to pay attention to what your actions are on this pyramid. In what ways have you contributed to a lack of trust? In what ways have you supported or empowered your staff to be more engaging, to be more accountable to each other? If you're a teacher, maybe you don't trust your colleagues. So this is a big moment for you to say, why do I not have the trust of my colleagues? What can I do to help build that so we can have difficult and hard conversations? Because you all know things come up and the way you deal with that is going to be very, very important. So I like what Patrick Lencioni talks about with the 5 dysfunctions. And you can really take this and just invert and figure out what I can do to make these better. So just very quickly, in terms of selfishness, so extraordinary, team-based, highly motivated teams have an attention to results and outcomes. Poor performers are managed and held accountable on high-performing teams. If you're not cutting it, someone's going to say something to you long before the principal does. And that's how I like to operate. I'd rather colleagues address it first, because typically if I get involved, it does feel more punitive. And there's just no way around it. It's contextual. If you come to my office and we talk, I can be as nice as pie, but it's still a conversation with the principal and it feels punitive. You know, there's a rumor. Now, I don't know if this is true or not, but they said that Steve Jobs, when he was at Apple, that he had this conversation with his employees. And again, I can't confirm this, but I'm gonna share it anyway. I think it's interesting if it did happen. They say that Steve Jobs once gathered his team in a giant room and he gave them this speech. And in this speech, he separated the teams. He said, I want these people to come sit on this side of the room. You're my A+ people. I want these people to sit in the middle. You're my B+ people. And I want these people to sit over here. You're my C, D, and F people. I know it sounds harsh already. It does. You probably know where this is going. So according to the legend, Steve Jobs says, A people don't like working with C, D, and F people. In other words, these are high performers. They want collaboration. They want trust. They want accountability. But my people on the other end are the opposite. They don't want people to talk to them. They don't want to be held accountable. They have low levels of trust. And according to the legend, Steve Jobs allegedly said, because my A+ people don't like C, D, and F people, you guys are all fired. And he just fired like 80 employees on the spot. I'm not sure if that's true. In education, I hope that never happens. That is a very harsh way to go about it, but you get the point. People who are very, I would say highly motivated, they do have an issue when other colleagues aren't carrying their weight, so to speak. And it does begin to eat at your culture. So my advice to you, if you're a leader, is to look at your high performers, understand who needs help, support and empower those people who aren't there yet to the best of your ability. Because if you do not, the cautionary tale is they will find a way to slow the team down. And in some ways, it will sabotage the results of the entire team. Now, this is the negative view. This is the dysfunction. This is why it doesn't work. I don't want to leave you with just the negative. Let's move on to the positive. There are many reasons to enjoy Google, many reasons. Gmail, Docs, Sheets, all that good stuff. But there's another thing that Google has done, and they've spent millions of dollars on this kind of behind the scenes. They had a couple projects. And one of those projects was called Project Aristotle. This is when they sunk millions of dollars into studying high-performing teams and figuring out what makes a team great. They came away with 4 key components to what makes a team great. So if you would, get your pencil ready. I want to give you these 5, but then talk about one specifically. So the first one is psychological safety. Write that down. This was the #1 element to a high-performing team, psychological safety. Number 2, structure and clarity. Structure and clarity. 3, meaning. Number 3 on Project Aristotle was meaning. Number 4, impact. Number 4 is impact. And then number 5, dependability. Number 5, according to Project Aristotle, was dependability. So in the time I have left, I want to deal with the first one, and this is super important. You can go online, you can find this. I shared an article in the notes. I'm not sure how you access it on Hoover, but it's an article by Rework, R-E-W-O-R-K, but you can find it just from a basic search. When you think about psychological safety, it is the perception that your teammates have on if they take a risk, what their team will do. And this is a fundamental human need. Again, I mentioned we all want to be accepted. We all have anxiety. We're all scared. The worst thing you can have on your team is people who are scared to take risks because they think their teammates are going to belittle, ostracize, or put them down. What Google found out was their best teams, they had very high levels of this. Teams felt safe sharing. They knew if they had a bad idea, they wouldn't get ran out of the room. They knew if they made a mistake, they would be supported. They knew they had the support of their teammates. So that's the number one thing that you can have on a team, is to be safe psychologically. So as you begin to grow your team, as you begin to keep your team intact, you got to pay attention to the extent to which your team feels safe psychologically. And another note I'll add, structure and clarity is super important. People need to know what their job responsibilities are. It needs to be clear. Brene Brown says, clear or clarity is kind. And that's very, very true. So Project Aristotle, high recommendation on reading it, studying that. If you're a teammate, understand why you may have these feelings about other people. Understand why you get perturbed when someone says a comment. It might come back to the fact that what they said doesn't create an environment that's safe psychologically. Okay. I want to end with the great Seymour Papert. He has this quote: you can't teach people everything they need to know. The best you can do is position them where they can find what they need to know and when they need to know it. This is all about empowerment. As a leader, as a teacher, principals do this with teachers and staff. Teachers do this with students. You have to be able to create an environment where people can find what they need and become independent learners, independent thinkers, and highly collaborative and highly effective human beings in this world. So I want to end on that because this quote is directly tied to major research that has been done by John Hattie and Marzano. And the word here is collective efficacy. And when people have collective efficacy, they believe that their future is in their own hands. Put a different way, they believe that they have the ability and the tools to change their destinies and their outcomes. When your teachers know that they can improve their practice, they can improve their classrooms through PD, through training, through opportunities, when they feel that way, when they also know that they can impact the school environment, they can vote for change and you'll agree to it, they can resist certain initiatives and you'll agree to it. When they know that they have control over the school in some kind of way, that is collective teacher efficacy. And if you're into effect sizes, I know that Dr. Stuvey in the ed psych department loves, standard deviation and means and numbers and all that. So the effect size of 1.39 is off the charts. It's exceptionally high. It is one of the most powerful things you can do as a leader, is to give your school staff a sense of collective efficacy. As promised, I've got some resources here. TheDecisionLab.com is a great place to go for articles on bias. Of course, I mentioned Jim Collins' Good to Great. I also mentioned Brene Brown. She has a book called Daring to Lead. It's fantastic. It's all about just our anxieties in the world and our vulnerabilities, and we all have them. Don't let anybody tell you anything different. I'm presenting right now. I blurred my background because I'm nervous about how you'll perceive my office. Dr. Stuvey is brave and courageous. He left his wide open. There are all kinds of ways that we are, insecure, and that's okay because we're human. As leaders, there's insecurity. We don't always know if the decision we're making is right. As teachers, you're not sure if what you said to a parent is right. You're not sure if you handled a conflict with a student the right way. We all have those things. So it's important to read about it, talk about it, connect with others. Project Aristotle's here. I mentioned Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, also the Compass Points activity. So those are a few resources there. They're linked, but they're also written out, so you can find them online. And then finally, I want to thank you for your time this morning. Complete your session eval before you leave, before you're done with the session. And again, I'm Jeremy Coleman. I'm a principal right now at Brookfield Elementary School in Warren Township. And it was a pleasure. It was an honor to present this information. If you want to connect with me, my email is jcoleman3. I should have had that on the screen. My apologies. jcoleman3@warren.in.us. K12.in.us. So you can email me anytime with any questions you would like. You can find me online as well. But that's my time. And Dr. Stuvey, if you have any closing remarks, I want to cue you in now as we wrap this session up.
Dr. Coleman, I really appreciate this time with you and your talk, your message. I prepare future teachers, mostly elementary and some special education teachers for the classroom. I prepare them hopefully to be excellent A+ members of teams at schools like yours and elsewhere. And everything you're saying, I think I have 10 pages of notes. So I was a good audience member. I'm a note taker in general and circled a number of things and so many questions to ask you and follow up with that I know we don't have time for, but I'll shoot you an email sometime. But one question in general, I teach learning theory, motivation theory, psychometrics, and everything that you were saying was like, he's going to say the word rubric. He's going to say the word rubric. And yes, he said the word rubric. And your scorecard and the sciences of leadership, the sciences of psychometrics can be harnessed to help us reduce bias in our hiring and in our team building. So I really appreciate that. And in my learning theory class, I teach about confirmation bias. So all this resonated really well with a person like me who's in a university setting. I'm not in your setting in K-12. What this is leading to is hopefully you might have a quick question, a quick answer in the time we have. I'm frequently asked by my students to write letters of recommendation as they search for jobs at schools like yours, and I know school principals are going to be reading them and so on. And I'm delighted when I get a call, as I have in the past couple calls in the past few weeks from students who are out there in the market trying to get a job, and I talk with the principal and get a sense to discuss the dispositions of this person, and that's where they go with this. They want to go to we see a lot of these online forms for hiring, such as that are very supervisory in nature. Can this person be supervised? And that I get it. Those are important questions in the business sense of what we do, but it's the principles that go a little bit further that get at the disposition. So two questions related to that. And we know that dispositions take a long time to develop and a long time to adjust and change. And then the dispositional assessment is really difficult. What are some recommendations you might have for me to help future teachers in kind of getting a sense of their own dispositions, their own biases? And maybe a follow-up question is, and it might be related to your comments about PD, what are some of the things that once you hire based on potential, how do you shape a disposition if possible?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. Thank you for asking it. The first answer is it's work. How do you develop an awareness of who you are? One, I believe it's lifelong. And when I talk to candidates, I recognize that I am just seeing one moment of their growth on a timeline. I may meet a person who is just new to self-discovery. Oftentimes first-year teachers, they don't have a voice yet. They haven't found their teacher voice yet. They're not quite sure who they are. And honestly, it doesn't happen until you have a class. It's hard to know who you are until you've actually been in the classroom, teaching, working, until you've had something happen to you. This is off topic a bit, but it kind of relates. Mike Tyson famously said, everyone has a plan until you get hit in the mouth. And I believe it. So teachers, it's the same thing. We all have great lesson plans until you teach it and your kids who are live, they don't respond to it. You got to figure out who you are as a teacher. So my first answer is it's a process, and I think it's continually evolving. who you are as a first year changes than who you are as a fifth year. So a teacher just must be aware of their journey. So I would just say, if you journal, if you record, if you do video, if you do media, whatever you do, record yourself over time, because I guarantee you, you will change, you will grow and develop your skill sets. Now, to your second question about PD and about, if I have this right, how do you develop a person's dispositions? I would say, number one, it's about awareness. The best thing I can do as a leader is pull the curtain back and show them that they have these biases. You know, when implicit bias training came out and swept the nation, a lot of people were surprised and they rejected it, quite frankly. They didn't know they had these biases. And this is across races. You know, there were African-American teachers saying, wait, I'm biased against Black kids, but I'm Black. How is that possible? Well, it's quite possible because of how our minds work and the biases. So the first thing that I can do as a principal is say, hey, listen, these biases are here. Think about something simple and it's not loaded and non-controversial, if you will. If I do a classroom checkup or an eval or something quick, and I stop in your room, I may say, which gender student do you call on the most? I may also ask, which side of the room do you call on most? I may also ask, what type of question do you ask in terms of level of difficulty? Low level questions, high level questions. Those are three different ways to look at how you interact with your kids that are really easy to get at. And so I think you can introduce the conversation by saying, hey, look, you have a bias towards girls. You only ask the girls questions. Or you might go deeper and say, well, guess what? You only ask the girls difficult questions. You ask the boys the easy who, what, when questions. But when it's time for the why, you're only asking girls. And why is that? So that's one way as a principal, I can kind of uncover the bias by just looking at taking like real data and just posing a question.
Thank you very this really helps kind of guides me and how I might help them get ready for the real world. I do teach them, or encourage them to journal whenever they can. But you're right, they're on a journey of their own self-awareness from freshman to senior, and then that nervous senior year when they're about to be tested in the marketplace for the jobs that they want and so on. So it's a moving target, and it's great to know the methods that schools like yours and leaders like you have that can be sensitive to where they are and willing to grow and the method of avoiding the biases in the hiring practices. This is really helpful to me, and I hope for all the other educators who are watching this in the future and so on. We do need to wrap up. It's 5 minutes past our allotted time. We got to get to some other sessions. And Dr. Coleman, it's been my pleasure. I look forward to dialoguing with you in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you for hosting. Thank you for having me.
We'll see you all in the future. All right, bye, everyone.